The city was alive with noise and motion, but billionaire William Bennett felt none of it as he stepped out of his sleek black car and adjusted his coat against the wind. Known across the nation as the founder of Bennett Holdings, a construction empire responsible for some of the country's most iconic buildings, William had spent his life climbing from modest beginnings to unimaginable success. His name was synonymous not just with wealth, but with generosity. Donations to hospitals, educational institutions, and shelters flowed constantly from his estate. Yet, despite the public admiration, his heart had been weighed down by personal losses. The early death of his youngest son, Michael, and the long estrangement from the rest of his family. It was on this ordinary morning, as he turned a busy street corner after visiting a charity site, that a voice called out to him. "Hi, trembling and unfamiliar Mr. Bennett," it asked. He turned, and there stood a thin girl with wide, hopeful eyes and a trembling smile. The girl, barely in her teens, introduced herself with quiet confidence. "My name is Emily. I think I'm your granddaughter." In her hands was a heart-shaped pendant, and as she handed it to him, William felt the breath leave his body. Inside the small locket was a faded photo of Michael, his son, smiling in a familiar way that struck deep in his chest. He reached for the pendant with shaking hands, unable to speak. Emily explained that her mother, whom Michael had loved in secret, had raised her alone after his untimely passing. They lived in a poor neighborhood, often struggling to get by. Her mother had kept the pendant and stories of Michael alive for Emily, but after she passed away from tuberculosis, the girl had no one left. "I've been looking for you," she said. "I didn't know if you'd believe me, but I had to try." William stared at her in silence, then slowly reached out and touched her cheek. In her features he saw Michael, the same gentle eyes, the same curve of the mouth. Still unsure and not wanting to be driven entirely by emotion, William invited Emily to his home, not as a guest, but as someone who might carry his blood. The mansion's grand halls, adorned with art and antique furniture, felt colder than usual as they walked through them together. William had the staff prepare a room for her and asked his most trusted doctor to arrange a DNA test. That night, as Emily stood by a massive window gazing at the city lights, William watched her from afar, his heart caught in a storm of hope and fear. Could this girl really be his granddaughter? And if so, how much of her life had he missed while he was consumed by business deals and board meetings? He thought of Michael, of how their last conversation had ended in disagreement, and how he never got the chance to say goodbye. If Emily was truly his granddaughter, then she was a piece of Michael, something he had lost and now might regain. The following week was agonizing. William continued his daily routines, but every moment was laced with anticipation. Emily, meanwhile, settled into the mansion. Slowly she was quiet, respectful, yet clearly overwhelmed by the sudden shift from poverty to palatial comfort. The staff adored her, especially when they saw her staring wide-eyed at chandeliers and marble floors as though they were in a museum. She never asked for anything, never acted entitled, only clung to the hope that she truly belonged. William, watching closely, began to feel protective, almost paternal. He didn't allow himself to say it aloud, but in his heart he had already started to believe. When the test results arrived, the doctor visited in person, carrying a sealed envelope and a knowing smile. William's hands trembled as he opened the letter. The words on the page made him stop breathing for a moment. "You are biologically related, Mr. Bennett. You are Emily's grandfather." Tears welled in his eyes before he even looked at her. Emily, who had been holding his hand nervously, looked up, unsure what it meant. William turned to her, smiling through tears. "You really are my granddaughter," he whispered, his voice full of awe and relief. Emily burst into tears and hugged him tightly, whispering, "I told you." Grandpa, that night, the house no longer felt empty. For the first time in years, William didn't dine alone. They shared stories, laughter, and late-night hot chocolate. The space that once echoed with silence was now alive with connection, healing what had long been broken. As the days went on, William introduced Emily to more of his world, not just the luxuries of his estate, but also the charity work that had become his life's mission. He brought her to community shelters, youth education programs, and feeding centers. He wanted her to understand the responsibility that came with their family name, not just the privileges. But more than anything, he simply wanted to know her. What books she liked, how she felt about school, what memories she had of Michael. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, and William started to believe that fate had finally given him a second chance, not to rewrite the past, but to build a future with someone who shared his blood and now his heart. What began as a random encounter on a busy street had unfolded into a deeply personal journey of reunion, revelation, and redemption. Life at the Bennett estate quickly transformed for young Emily. Just weeks after discovering her true heritage, she was swept into a world she never dreamed she'd belong to. Mr. William Bennett, overjoyed to have finally found his granddaughter, spared no effort in giving her the life he believed she deserved. Custom dresses were tailored for her by the most exclusive designers in New York. A personal stylist guided her through boutique showrooms. William took her to upscale restaurants where classical music floated through the air as waiters placed silver platters before them. For her upcoming birthday, William arranged a celebration on the estate's garden grounds, lavish decorations, gourmet catering, and even live entertainment. It was meant to be a dream come true for a child who had known only loss and hardship. And for a while, it was. Emily's eyes lit up at every new experience, and her laughter filled the halls that had long stood silent. The day of her birthday party arrived, and the estate transformed into a fairy tale setting. Balloons danced in the breeze, tables overflowed with cupcakes and confections, and a stage was set for performers and games. William had even arranged a surprise, inviting Emily's old friends from her previous neighborhood. When the white vans arrived and her former playmates stepped out wide-eyed and dressed in their best clothes, Emily stood frozen. Then her smile faltered as her friends approached her with simple handmade gifts she pulled back. One girl reached out to admire Emily's sparkling dress, only for Emily to snap. "Don't touch it, you'll get it dirty." Another child offered her a wrapped candy with a grin, and Emily responded by slapping it away. "I don't need that. We have real food here," she scoffed. From a distance, William watched silently. He had expected joy, maybe even tears of gratitude, but what he witnessed instead stirred discomfort deep in his chest. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the estate's trees, William walked to Emily's room holding a gift box inside a brand new phone he had specially ordered. Emily squealed with excitement when she opened it and hugged him tightly. But as William glanced around the room, he noticed something unsettling. In a corner, stacked haphazardly, were the unopened presents from her neighborhood friends. "Emily," he asked gently, "why haven't you opened those?" She shrugged, brushing her hair aside. "They're probably junk. I didn't even want them here." Grandpa William felt a pang in his heart. He had hoped the party would bring her happiness, but not at the cost of her compassion. That night, he found himself unable to sleep. He paced through the hallways of the estate, haunted by the memory of her dismissive tone, her arrogance, and her growing distance from the humble girl who had once approached him with nothing but a pendant and a wish. The following morning, as he strolled through the back courtyard, he noticed the maid carrying a large trash bag toward the bin. "What's in there?" he asked. The maid hesitated, then replied, "Miss Emily asked us to throw these away. They're the unopened gifts from the party." William opened the bag and stared at the discarded boxes. Some were wrapped with colorful paper, others adorned with handmade ribbons, each one a token of love and effort from children who remembered her. He took the gifts into his study and sat quietly, his heart heavy. He had given Emily the world, hoping to heal her pain, but in doing so had he unintentionally taught her that wealth was the only thing worth valuing. Over the next few days, William began observing her more closely. He noticed the way she began ordering the household staff around, speaking curtly when breakfast wasn't served to her liking or when a dress wasn't ironed perfectly. She grew impatient, irritable, expecting things to be done for her instantly. It wasn't malice, he realized, but a dangerous sense of entitlement that had taken root. She no longer looked people in the eyes when they spoke to her. She barely thanked the cooks, the cleaners, or even the driver who patiently waited for her after school. For William, each moment chipped away at the hope he had once clung to, that her kindness and humility would remain untouched by luxury. She was becoming someone he didn't recognize. In the solitude of his study, William stared at an old family portrait himself, his late wife and young Michael. "What would you do?" "Michael," he whispered aloud. "How do I protect her from what I've built?" He realized then that wealth alone couldn't raise a child into a decent human being. Emily needed more than comfort. She needed character. William loved her deeply, but love he now understood also meant guiding her when she strayed. He had to act before it was too late, before the values he cherished were buried under designer shoes and silver spoons. A plan began to form in his mind, not to punish, but to teach. He didn't yet know how he'd do it, but one thing was certain. If Emily was to truly inherit his legacy, she would have to earn it, not through name or fortune, but through humility, compassion, and respect for every soul around her. One crisp morning, William Bennett stood quietly outside Emily's bedroom, holding a decision heavier than any boardroom deal he'd ever made. He had spent countless nights reflecting on how to help his granddaughter understand the values she was losing: humility, gratitude, and respect. Finally, he decided the only way forward was not through more gifts, but through absence. That morning, over a simple breakfast of toast and black coffee, he looked at Emily and said with solemn eyes, "Emily, I have some difficult news. Our business has collapsed. Everything's gone, the estate, the cars, even the staff." Emily stared at him in disbelief, her fork pausing mid-air. "What? How?" she stammered. "We'll be moving to a small rural village where I still own a modest piece of land." He added, his voice firm. She looked horrified, but William showed no hint of wavering. The bags were packed by noon, and by dusk they were on a bus heading far from the comforts of the Bennett estate. After a long and dusty journey through winding countryside roads, the bus dropped them at a small terminal miles away from city lights. From there they climbed into an old tricycle that took them through fields lined with sugarcane and rows of potato farms. Emily grumbled the entire ride, shielding herself from the sun and complaining about the heat. "This can't be real." "Grandpa," she whispered as they approached a tiny wooden hut with a rusty tin roof. "It's our new home," William replied simply. Inside there was no air conditioning, no chandelier, no marble floors, just a worn-out mat, a small stove, and a single shelf of canned goods. Emily looked around in disbelief, and tears brimmed in her eyes. "We can't live like this," she mumbled. But William said nothing more that night, only placing his old suitcase in the corner and beginning to unpack. The very next day, before Emily could fully grasp her new surroundings, William told her it was time to contribute. "You'll be helping out on a local farm starting today," he said. "Manual work. It'll help us get by." Emily gawked at him. "I've never done that kind of thing." "I don't even know how," William nodded with quiet patience. "You'll learn." That afternoon they met Mrs. Diane Wheeler, a no-nonsense farmer with a sun-wrinkled face and calloused hands. "This one," Diane said, glancing skeptically at Emily. "She's not exactly built for the fields." William smiled faintly and replied, "She'll do fine." With a sigh, Diane handed Emily a burlap sack and a hand hoe. "You dig, collect potatoes and carry them. No complaints," she barked. Emily's face turned pale, but she followed Diane to the fields, her designer sneakers sinking into the dirt. For the first time in her life, she worked under the scorching sun, her arms trembling, her back aching from the labor, unknown to Emily. Everything had been orchestrated. William had visited Diane days earlier and explained his plan. He handed her an envelope of cash and said, "Don't go easy on her. She needs to feel it. Every strain, every blister. She needs to understand what life looks like without privilege." Diane, though hesitant at first, agreed to play her role. And so, as Emily sweated and stumbled in the fields, struggling with tasks as basic as digging a straight row, William watched from a distance, hidden behind a tree or an old tool shed. His heart ached each time he saw her pause in exhaustion or wipe her tears, but he held himself back. He knew he couldn't intervene, not yet. This pain, he believed, was necessary. Only through discomfort could she rediscover the simple joys and basic kindnesses that wealth had begun to erode. By the end of her first week, Emily had changed. Not completely, but cracks had begun to form in the shell of entitlement. She no longer protested each morning. She rose, got dressed in plain clothes, and walked with her tools slung over her shoulder. Her hands grew rougher, her skin tanned under the sun, and her laughter, while rare, started returning. Diane even caught her smiling during lunch breaks, sharing bread and stories with the other farmhands. William observed it all silently, his heart swelling with hope. Still, he reminded himself this was only the beginning. The goal wasn't just to humble her, but to awaken empathy, an appreciation of life stripped of luxury. One evening, after Emily returned from the field with dust on her cheeks and dirt under her nails, she sat beside William on the porch steps, sipping water from a tin cup. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I used to think everything would always be easy, that things would just show up when I asked. But now, even sitting down feels like a reward." William looked at her but said nothing, just nodded and smiled. That night, as she slept soundly under a thin blanket, he stared at the ceiling of the hut silently, thanking whatever power had given them this chance. Maybe, just maybe, the lesson was starting to take root. Each passing day in the village brought subtle but powerful changes in Emily. Though she had arrived with reluctance and resentment, something in the rhythm of rural life began to shift her perspective. At first, she struggled with the physical demands of working on the potato farm, but over time her hands grew steadier, her back stronger. One afternoon, after receiving a small payment from Mrs. Diane Wheeler, she rushed back to the hut, holding the worn bills like a trophy. "Grandpa, I earned this," she beamed. William looked at her with quiet pride, nodding gently. That weekend, on their way back from the local market, they passed a frail, homeless man, shivering under the shade of a bamboo tree. Without hesitation, Emily stopped, bought him a warm bowl of soup and a piece of bread, and placed it in his hands. "I know what it feels like to be hungry," she whispered. William watched in silence, his heart swelling with emotion. This was the granddaughter he had longed to see. Back at the hut, Emily began to take more initiative. She no longer needed to be told what to do. She would rise before dawn, prepare a simple breakfast, and head to the fields with a quiet determination. In the evenings, she cooked their meals with newfound passion, adding creativity to even the simplest ingredients. Okra sweet potato leaves a handful of dried shrimp. She laughed more often now, not at the expense of others, but with the farm workers as they teased one another under the sun. There was a certain grace in the way she now carried herself, no longer the demanding heiress who once scoffed at plain rice, but a young woman who found joy in the smell of fresh earth and the sound of shared laughter. Even Diane noticed the difference. "That girl's got grit," she muttered to William one afternoon. "Didn't think she had it in her." One breezy evening, Emily was preparing ingredients for a modest dinner when William's phone rang inside the hut. He stepped out to take the call, not realizing Emily was just around the corner collecting firewood. She stopped in her tracks when she overheard him say, "Yes, tell the investors I'll return to the office next month. Bennett Holdings is still under my control." Her hands froze and the wood slipped from her grasp. Her eyes widened in disbelief, the weight of those few words crashing over her like a storm. Everything she had endured, digging in the dirt, working under the sun, sleeping on a straw mat, was based on a lie. Her heart pounded as she pieced together the truth. The estate wasn't lost. They weren't poor. Her suffering had been orchestrated. That night, Emily barely touched her food. She lay awake staring at the ceiling of the hut, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and betrayal. The next morning, William awoke to find her bed empty. Her few clothes were gone. Panic surged through him as he rushed outside and called her name, but the only response was the rustling of trees and distant bird calls. He ran to the potato fields, hoping she had gone to work early, but she was nowhere to be found. Mrs. Diane hadn't seen her either. Hours passed in a blur of searching through fields along dirt roads near the bus stop, but it was clear Emily had run away. She had left, not because she hated the simple life, but because her trust had been shattered. William returned to the hut alone, his shoulders heavy with guilt. The silence inside was deafening. He sat on her empty bed, holding the woven mat she used as a blanket. "I only wanted to teach her," he whispered. "I never meant to break her." He stared at a photo of his late son Michael hung modestly on the wall. "Did I go too far?" he asked the photo, as if expecting an answer. He thought of the girl who once shouted at maids and sneered at second-hand gifts, but also the same girl who now cooked with love and gave food to strangers. The change had been real, but so was the pain he had caused. In that quiet, lonely room, William realized that intention alone was not enough. His methods, though well-meaning, had hurt someone he loved dearly. He could only hope that wherever Emily had gone, she would understand why he did it. But for now, he had to face the consequence of his choice, a granddaughter who had finally found her heart, only to feel it broken by the one who guided her there. The days that followed Emily's disappearance were some of the darkest in William Bennett's life, racked with guilt, sleepless nights, and a heart heavy with regret. The stress eventually took a toll on his health. One evening, while reviewing company documents, a sudden wave of dizziness overcame him. Moments later, he collapsed. The staff rushed him to the hospital just in time. As he lay on the sterile hospital bed, connected to IV drips and heart monitors, William stared blankly at the ceiling, whispering her name, Emily, with every shallow breath. Regret swirled in his mind. Had he pushed too hard? Had he lost her forever? He didn't expect forgiveness. All he wanted now was to know she was safe. Days later, as the soft morning light filtered through the hospital window, the door creaked open. William slowly turned his head and froze. Standing there, teary-eyed and breathless, was Emily. Her face was flushed from running, her eyes red from crying. She rushed to his bedside, gripping his hand tightly. "Grandpa, I'm so sorry," she whispered through sobs. "I was angry. I was confused. But I know now you weren't trying to hurt me. You just wanted me to grow." William's eyes welled with tears. He gently placed his hand over hers. "Sweetheart, I was wrong to deceive you, even if I meant... Well, I wanted to show you what matters most in life, but I should have trusted you more." They held each other for a long time, the pain between them dissolving into a tender, silent understanding. In that hospital room, something unspoken passed between them, true healing. After William's recovery, they returned together to the Bennett estate, but this time the mansion felt different, not because it had changed, but because they had. Emily didn't walk in with wide-eyed wonder at the chandeliers or marble floors. Instead, her first stop was the staff quarters. One by one, she looked each employee in the eye and offered heartfelt apologies. "I was rude, I was entitled. I hope you'll forgive me," she said to Teresa, the head housekeeper, who wiped away a tear and hugged her tightly. From that day on, Emily immersed herself in the Bennett Foundation's charitable work. She joined her grandfather on outreach visits to orphanages, hospitals, and food banks. She no longer handed out aid as if bestowing a favor, but as someone who had once stood in the shoes of the needy. Her heart, once closed by comfort, now beat with purpose. The months turned to years, and Emily's passion only grew. Under William's mentorship, she led new initiatives focused on education and rural development. She even launched a youth leadership program aimed at helping teens from low-income communities discover their voices and potential. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. She became a symbol of hope and transformation, praised not for her wealth, but for her character. The media once referred to her as the heiress with a heart, but she preferred to be called simply Emily. William, now older and more at peace, often watched from a distance with quiet pride, seeing the legacy of his late son Michael live on in his granddaughter. One sunny morning, Emily and William took a quiet trip back to the countryside. The fields had bloomed since their last visit, and the air was thick with the scent of potatoes and wildflowers. They walked side by side through the same dirt paths Emily had once trudged while grumbling under the sun. "Do you remember that tree over there?" William asked. Emily smiled. "That's where I tried to hide from the heat." They both chuckled, their laughter echoing across the open land. When they arrived at Mrs. Diane Wheeler's potato farm, Diane greeted them with a warm embrace. "You've grown into a fine woman." "Emily," she said. Misty-eyed Emily thanked her sincerely. "This place changed my life, and you were a part of that." They spent the afternoon sharing stories with the workers, eating simple food, and reminiscing about those transformative weeks that had once felt like punishment but turned out to be a blessing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the fields, William turned to Emily. "True wealth," he said softly, "isn't measured in stocks or estates. It's measured in the lives we touch and the love we give." Emily nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "And it all started here, Grandpa, in this very field." Together they stood hand in hand, a grandfather and granddaughter, no longer separated by misunderstanding, but united by love, forgiveness, and a shared commitment to making the world a little kinder. At Deep Inside HQ, we believe that the most powerful stories are the ones that change us. Stories of growth, compassion, and second chances. If this journey moved you, if you felt something shift inside as Emily found her way back to what truly matters, then we invite you to stay with us. There are more stories waiting. Stories that will challenge how you see the world and maybe even how you see yourself. So don't just leave quietly. Subscribe to Deep Inside HQ, turn on the notification bell, and join us as we continue to explore the depths of the human spirit. Your next favorite story is just one click away.